This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl.
Oh boy.
Episode 65, October 9th. What a great week it's been, Tim.
Well, and for the audience listeners who don't know, we usually do these intros Tuesday or Wednesday. So this week hasn't slowed down. So who knows what's going to happen in the next couple of days? But we got a lot of news from last time until now. That's for sure.
Well, one of my favorite escapades that have happened, and it couldn't have happened to a better, or should I say, worse person. Now that Trump supposedly, he's got more diseases than just COVID, but now that he's on dexamethasone, which is a cheap steroid, which is used to treat usually only the very sick, since it can be very dangerous to people with mild COVID. Now, it's been linked to everything from all of the problems he already has, mania, memory problems, psychosis. I mean, he's already afflicted with this, so what's a little bit of roid rage to go with that deadly cocktail?
And of course, losing his sense of taste. I mean, didn't that happen a long time ago?
Well, you eat enough fucking Big Macs, and I'm surprised he hasn't, or he probably already has had a couple of heart attacks. But then he goes on, going against everyone's advice, does his little drive-by wave to his 20 magabillies that are out there. I mean, I'm surprised there weren't more people praying for death. And it's interesting that Twitter disallowed all those prayers for his death. So he gets out, and then the Lincoln Project does a great ad about comparing him to like Evita when he's on the balcony. It's pretty good. You should check it out. Tuesday he goes on a tweet rant blaming everything, as he always does, on everyone else but himself, as his fellow bootlicking felons. And, oh, well, the stock market just plunged. The only thing he had left to hang his fucking wig on, that idiot. And now not only does the Joint Chief of Staffs and 9 generals go into quarantine after attending a super spreader, another one, event at the White House, but 15 members of the Cheeto King's inner circle have now tested positive, and I'm sure more have it than that. The latest being that right-wing racist and conspiralist Stephen Miller.
Yeah, Steve Miller's kind of the worst one. That guy.
I mean, what about his pregnant wife, who's Pence's assistant, and she had COVID in May and claims to have recovered. Now, I have no pray for death for any of them, but this is kind of what pissed me off. 13 hospitality workers employed by Murray's Restaurant in downtown Minneapolis, which catered to a Trump fundraiser on September 30th, where around 40 idiotic contributors paid $200,000 a couple or $100,000 per person for the chance to meet that now super spreader, the
How much a person?
$100,000. Okay,
God.
To hear him lie through his fucking teeth as he probably infected them all. Now, the event was just 2 days before Trump admitted he was positive for COVID. Now, the restaurant now said all the staff who attended are immediately ordered into a 14-day quarantine and will later be tested for coronavirus. Now, you think that the COVID-infected cunt would pay their wages for the next 3 months, but the rip-off king of multiple felonies who is yet to be arrested, and let's hope he is arrested before he dies, and that his death is a slow and horrible thing. Well, I mean, Tim, that's my happy thought for the day.
Well, yeah, I mean, another one, Chris Christie, who is obese, and I think he has asthma, and he's constantly getting bitch slapped by Trump, yet he keeps on bending over for him. I don't really get it. What about the Secret Service men that were in his limo during his little parade? I mean, taxpayer money paying these guys who are I guess he just doesn't consider them at all.
Well, look, he doesn't consider any fucking one but himself. We know this. So what's a couple of... Look, I think there were already like 19 Secret Service people that have caught it. So,
well, all right. So what's clear is that he rushed back to the White House, and today
well, sure, he's on all kinds of drugs. He's rushing around.
Well, he's roided out. He sent a memo to...
By the way, Tim, I hate to interrupt, but remember when I had roid rage for like 5 minutes once? You were there, fortunately.
Roid rage is a thing, and
you helped me immensely. I mean, it's not how I got my voluptuous figure by doing steroids. I had to do some steroids for incredible pain, but I did have a roid rage 5 minute long.
I do remember that. Yes, I mean yes.
I was just happy you were there. It did. The steroids did help me immensely. And you know what? Every now and then, I do like to explode off the stage, where I usually save it for. Go ahead.
Yes. Well, fortunately, Trump's not on anabolic steroids. That would be really not a real nightmare. But
Would we?
yeah.
Could we tell if he gets moon face?
or if his balls shrink, or if he got boobs. I don't know.
He has boobs. His balls are all in his head, and they're loose. I don't know, mushroom head. Go ahead.
Well, so he sent a memo to Mitch McConnell, basically saying we are going to cock block this COVID relief stimulus that Congress presented, and he basically said, we're just not going to work on any of that. All eyes on pushing through that Supreme Court.
Right. 3 days ago, he said, pass it, let's get the money to the people. Now he says don't, and then the stock markets plunge.
And then here's the thing to the Christian right. Supposedly those experimental antibodies that Trump was on were stem cell from dead babies, and so they love this guy, and they don't seem to care. If
well, okay, one of the idiot sons, that would be Eric, just came out and said, with no facts to back it up, on Fox News the other night, my father saved Christianity. What the fuck? Because he held a Bible upside down. He has been on tape. He's been on tape caught saying he can't stand any religions or any religious people. They're all fucking nuts and fanatics. Yeah. What did he? I mean, look, they can't even lie about one thing that nobody can fact check. I mean, we can fact check everything they say, and they're all fucking lies. And Eric, you know what? Get the COVID.
I don't even know what saved Christianity means. I mean, if you are
a
religious person, you can be one in this country. So, like, well, I don't know what they're talking about.
Well, not if you're a Muslim, or not if, if you're an evangelical, it contributes to his fodder. I guess that's all right. He's got no fucking idea about religion, spiritual. He doesn't have a soul. How can he know about spirituality?
Well, in this 21st century has a lot of complicated issues, and so he's been very successful at having these simple solutions. Like, okay, Muslims are going to kill you. Mexicans are going to take your jobs. The Chinese are going to take over our economy. And,
after sucking Chinese cock for about 4 years, that suddenly they're the enemy.
Well, he took out a full-page ad in the '80s saying that Japan was about to take over the United States, and that we're all going to be speaking Japanese. And he was really off the mark on that. He's saying the same thing about China now, and
after they graciously gave the Stepford daughter like 19 trademarks,
our trade deficit to China is greater than it ever has been. He ran on that in the last thing that he was going to really stick it to them. We do, during the peak of the Cold War, we would do about $3 billion in trade with Soviet Russia. We do about $3 billion in trade with China a day. And guess who's losing on that one?
Well, excuse me, let me butt in. Has Trump ever made a successful business deal other than wrangling money out of people for failed projects? He isn't. Well, he did, accidentally. He is the worst businessman, and according to Joe Biden, I have to agree, you're the worst president there ever was. Shut up, man, you clown. Another thing that's really awful, and of course the Cheeto King will not commit to helping at all, is on Monday, this Monday, it's called the August Complex Fire in Northern California. It expanded that one fire beyond 1 million acres, elevating it from a mere mega fire, to a new classification, gigafire, never used before in contemporary, setting in the state. So as 1 million acres, fire larger than the state of Rhode Island, and it's raging still across 7 counties. And it was an amalgamation of several fires caused when lightning struck dry forest in August. And it's been burning now for 50 days. But, Trump, in Austria, they sweep the floor. Give me a fucking break, you idiot. Now, the August Complex Fire, it has a list of huge fires that have shoot through millions, 4 to 7 million acres of California this year. It's double the previous annual record. 5 of the 6 largest fires ever recorded in the state have occurred in this year already, which is just Absolutely incomprehensible.
Well, that's particularly scary because historically fire season in California, well, particularly Northern California and into Oregon, the driest month is October. So we actually haven't technically, based on patterns, we actually are not out of the fire yet. Let's put it that way. October could be worse.
I think you've got some rock and roll news that you have to get off
Well,
your chest.
this is a sad day
For some.
For some, and for me, I mean, Eddie Van Halen passed away, 65 years old, to throat cancer. He had tongue cancer before, and he had struggled with a lot of things. So, the amount of comments on this and how eclectic his fan base, even if you don't like Van Halen the band, Eddie Van Halen was
cute,
absolute innovator guitar player.
He was great.
I mean, atonal, creative. There's definitely a pre-Eddie Van Halen guitar style and a post one that, in terms of just what he influenced. Also, just his intuition, soaking his humbucker pickups into wax. He just thought of this to create so he could control the feedback better. But it goes on. So basically, he and his brother and his parents immigrated from Netherlands to Los Angeles when when Eddie was 10. The father was a classical clarinetist. I think he played for the LA Philharmonic, in fact. But they moved, and the boys were both, the mother was Indonesian, the father's Dutch. They both were like the student state champs for classical piano in California. So there's a lot of competition there. The word is, Eddie, even with a musical father, or like a professional classical musician, never learned how to read music. He was so gifted, he tricked his top-tier classical teacher, because his dad was in those circles, took her a couple years to figure out he couldn't read music. He was just watching her hands. And
could he read a book?
I think he could, but I don't.
Did he need to? By the way, Tim, you know my story about David Lee Roth once trying to pick me up.
Well, you can tell it.
Well, I was in some club in LA. I think it was called the Lingerie. And up straggles the scaggy David Lee Roth. Not looking too good. He never did. Balding, long hair, hairy. And he says to me, "Are you looking for trouble? I delivered. You want to come out to my limousine?" I go, "Oh, please, shut up, man, you clown. You're the worst rock singer I've ever seen."
Well, he took the Black Oak, Arkansas's look, that's for sure. But he did his own thing. But it's not about David Lee Roth.
No, it isn't. Never was.
Last thing about Eddie Van Halen. I mean, I'm a professional musician. You can just a natural. No matter what you think of anything about him, so effortless. I mean, this guy was just an unbelievable master.
All right, well, I'm sure everyone will be going to YouTube and watching all of the live Van Halen. So what else is on your plate this week, Tim? Well,
there's a woman, they wouldn't give her name in Australia, but they found a cyst in her brain that was filled with tapeworm larvae. She was losing her vision. They thought she had a tumor. They got an MRI. They said, "Oh, there's a tumor. We're going to open you up." And sure enough, because she ate some uncooked pork, and usually the tapeworms go to your intestines, but this one took a detour to her brain.
Well, why would she eat uncooked pork?
You know,
hungry, I guess.
A restaurant, or she doesn't know how to cook, or who fucking knows. Now, this is an interesting story. Ryan Normoyle, 29, he died, but that's not really what the story is. He was on a 3-week, he's from New Jersey, he was on this little 3-week California vacation. He rents a boat, and he goes to the deepest part of Lake Tahoe, and he has his phone, I think a GoPro, I don't know what's going on, but he films himself jumping off the boat. He fucked up. Let's put it this way. He kept the boat in gear. Oh. And so as he splashes in, he's in the middle of this lake, and that thing fucking...
It shoot him up?
No, it didn't shoot him up. It fucking took off, and he was swimming after it, and see ya, and he sank. And so he died. And so, but it gets more interesting. So they didn't know where he was, but then the boat shows up, and they're like, "Well, where's the dude that rented this fucking thing?" And so they go on this big search, and they're, he suicide, blah, blah, blah. They found out, I think they looked at the tape or something, or the recorder, they see him laughing and waving the camera and jumping in. So then the family, they're like, "Well, we want a confirmation." They hire, it's called Bruce's Legacy, which is the #1 nonprofit organizer that specializes and underwater body recoveries. And I didn't even think such a thing fucking exists. And they,
All right, Tim, as a scuba diver and a surfer, you should know that.
It's
good to know. It's good to know.
Supposedly NYPD has a scuba team that looks for shit in the Hudson East River, and all these amateur scuba divers in NYPD are like, oh, I can can do this. Not for everyone.
You can't.
Pitch black. Oh, you're feeling
gross.
around down there. I mean, it's gross. So they coordinate a huge effort, which include the South Lake Tahoe PD, South Lake Tahoe FD, several Marine units, a unmanned submarine.
Who's paying for all this shit, I wonder?
The family. The parents are from New Jersey. They got money or something. So they pay for this. It led to his death, broke a record. It led to the deepest body recovery in U.S. history, and they found it at 1,560 feet deep. And of course, there was no real scuba diver down there. The pressure is insane, but they got one of these submarines. But just to hook it in and carry him up, and they're like, it was like, and he had bloated at that point. It was like pulling up a 300-pound anchor forever.
Now, I've yet to see that one because it just happened on Forensic Files, but I'll be looking for it in a couple of years' time.
The story to the, don't rent a boat in an area you're not familiar with to go swimming off that one boat. I mean, it just wasn't the wisest choice.
Well, Tim, before we wrap this up, any
Sure.
other last details? Because I have a few.
Little stories. That St. Louis couple who aimed guns. Yeah, they've been formally indicted by a grand jury, so that is going to go. They're pressing charges. The only animal story is that there's a sanctuary of lab chimps. Not ones that they tortured, but just ones that they did all types of shit with out in New Mexico.
I wonder who the Monkey King. Tim, are you volunteering to be the Monkey King?
Nah, chimps are no joke. You got to be careful with those.
I don't need any more monkeys in my group.
Well, just like old dogs that when their masters die, and no one wants them. These are like 45-year-old chimps. No one wants them,
sad.
and they're just like hanging out in some like retirement orphanage or something.
They should hook up with that monkey crew in Thailand. Remember, that was like sexually aggressive and attacking people because nobody was feeding them. I watch out for them.
My dad actually had 2 pet monkeys. A scientist.
What? You mean besides you and your brother?
Well, it was before we were born, and my mom said either they go or I go because those things were a pain in the ass. My dad's botanist friend who was killed by a grizzly bear, a different story. He a scientist. He had these 2 squirrel monkeys, and his wife.
Did they wear diapers?
Quite the contrary. They liked my dad because he would feed them, but anyone else they would throw their shit at. And they had this obsession with mayonnaise. They would get their little paws and they could unscrew the thing and just go nuts on it. But they're not good pets. Let's put it that way. They lasted a few weeks, maybe a month. They were.
All right, that's enough about the animal stories. Unfortunately, the wildfires in California could not be quenched, but maybe we need to follow Trump's advice and drop a nuclear bomb inside a hurricane because Delta, a Category 4 hurricane, which is the 10th to hit the Gulf Coast this season, and the 5th to make landfall, which is double the usual average of 1 to 2 per year. And hurricane season doesn't even end till November 30th. But
that could go longer. I mean, Sandy happened right around Halloween.
Oh yeah. Well, that's when you weren't in the band yet, but that's exactly when I landed on Hurricane Sandy, last flight in, to start Retrovirus.
That was a weird day for me too. There was a psychedelic week there in more ways than one. And speaking of nukes, real quickly, I think I read that one of Trump's top Pentagon generals, the one that's in the head guy for nukes, he's got COVID.
As I was saying before, Joint Chief of Staff and 9 generals have it.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of storms, Stormy Daniels, and I got to give it to her, lashed out at the Stepford wife, that would be Melania, a day after secret tapes emerged in which Melania referred to Stormy as a porn hooker. Now, let me quote Stormy. Stormy said, "Ha ha 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 ha. Although I wasn't paid for sex, and therefore technically not a hooker, I'll take being that over what you are any day. You sold your pussy and your soul. Keep talking about me. I like your new tits. By the way, post more nudes, hashtag be best, LOL, or I would say be beast or be breast, or continue to be a fucking idiot who has a cyberbullying campaign but can't control her husband's fucking roid rage or tweet storms. Even Twitter is banning him because he's such a fucking idiot. Now, speaking about real hurricanes, that brings us up to our episode now of Penny Slinger, who speaks about, describes, makes films, photography, collages, where women are the main event. So I'd like to introduce this episode of Lydia and Spin. Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and Penny Slinger. This is the Lydia and Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and our special guest, Penny Slinger, an incredible artist, a surrealist, truly, a living artist who's worked in collage, film, installation, performances, made books, all kinds of very haunting, beautiful, often black and white. There's also color, and which really address the interior of the female condition in so many ways. Welcome, Penny.
Thank you so much. So great to be with you, and takes one to know one, you know, all your beautiful manifestations in so many different media.
I found many parallels in our work as I was watching. We're talking today specifically about this incredible documentary film called Out from the Shadows that Richard Kovitch did on your life as an artist, specifically dealing with the late 1960s to about 1977, I think, and all of the art and the different formats that you created there. It's a visually stunning film interspersed with interviews with you, really so articulately describing what you were doing. What I wanted to ask you is, seeing all this work in retrospect, do you feel that you really understood what you were doing at the time, or you instinctually had to do that and you understand it better now?
It's a kind of combination, I think. I think we come in fully formed as who we are. I don't think that I've really changed in a sense that much in terms of knowing what I wanted to do. I've always had a very strong will and intention, but I think as you grow older, you're able to look and kind of see the bigger picture of how all the threads interconnect that you just did at the time, as you say, intuitively and instinctively, and just doing it because that's what you had to do. But I always felt that it was, you know, had a prescience and importance, and that I needed to get this message across. But as I get older and review it, then you can see it all in a perspective of a grander time frame, really, as things have changed generation to generation.
I find that sometimes with some of the lyrics I've written, for instance, it'll take me 6 years to understand, because I do a lot of automatic writing in a sense, and I'm like, oh, now I understand what that means fully, because it's something that boils in you and has to come out. So we just do it. How long did it take you to do this incredible film, Out of the Shadows, which has been in some film festivals and is available now, streaming and on Blu-ray?
Yes, it was about probably 4-year process altogether, but not all of that was making the film. A lot of it was, you know, the following up and pulling all the threads together. And it took a while to get people like Peter Whitehead, who'd been my partner at that time, to actually agree to come on the film. So those were the things that took a while. But Richard was incredibly diligent in terms of really following up on all the connections of going to see places that I'd lived. You know, he didn't do a casual or superficial job with it. He really went into it in depth, which is why it took a bit longer.
What's fantastic is that you had all that footage of so much. It's so important to document stuff.
Yeah.
Which is what I always say. And you have a lot of documentation of that work, which might have been shown at the time, but now is having a renaissance.
Yes, and it's been a little tricky keeping things together, and I don't have everything, of course, and certain things got destroyed along the way, dramatic things happened. But even though I've moved around the world and been in all kinds of different situations, I felt that it's really important to try and keep this archive together, because it is a history, and if you lose all those documents, then you don't have the proof, so to speak, of what happened. So I've tried to keep as much together as I could.
I've been a rabid documentarian, journalist of my life and others. I love this quote that was in the film. It makes so much sense. From historical to hysterical, because we know that hysterical means from the womb.
Right. Right, and it's a little strange when it comes from a man, because you're not sure where they're coming from. Remember how all those women's diseases back in the earlier days were treated as being pure hysteria in the worst sense of the word, and yet what he was talking about was relevant, because there's a lot more consciousness now in the whole female community about that seat of the womb from which all our creation comes, and that we can, honor and bless that rather than see it in terms of the curse and things like that they used to call menstruation,
Well, I will be forever grateful for the doctor that thought the cure for hysteria was the electric vibrator. I have to say, it's one of the best inventions ever. And if I start to get too hysterical, you know exactly what I'm going to hit. Trust me on that. I love that you said that you had to become, because you had to become your own muse, because you were just tired of the way that women were often the muses, and then not even really represented as the model or the inspiration, but not really taken into full appreciation for the contributions they've made to the men that then became the known artist.
Exactly, and looking through the history of art, I saw the female form, especially the naked female form, occurs again and again and again. It's one of the favorite subjects of art, and yet it was woman as object, because nearly all of that was by a male artist. And so I thought, isn't it about time we actually were able to look at ourselves and express who we are from the inside, not how someone's seeing us from the outside? So that seemed to me to be the challenge that needed to be taken on fully. And if I was going to do it, I didn't want to do it at surface value. I really wanted to use that self-reflection in a dynamic way to examine the blood and guts as well as the fluff on the surface.
Well, and speaking of the blood and guts, one of your presentations, 50% to the Visible Woman, I loved when you started using drawings of dissections, or you went to did you go to the morgue? You went to investigate. I've always been, having had a few surgical interventions on my body, and loving Gunther von Hagen's Body World, I love the interior of the body, and I love how you represented that as part of what we don't see, but it is part of what we are. And it reminds me of Annie Sprinkle showing her cervix to the public,
Right.
which most people are horrified to see because they've never seen that inside the woman's vagina lays something that does look a bit like a penis.
Yeah, well, Annie's a good friend, and I love her for what she did and continues to do in the world with her ecosexuality now. But that was the thing. I like the whole interior of the body. I've always been fascinated by those diagrams, and on the cover of 50% The Visible Woman, I used one of those Visible Woman diagrams where you peel off the different layers and you see the muscles and the bones and the skin, all the different surfaces. And I felt that it was fascinating in itself, but it was also very symbolic of peeling off the layers, taking away the veils, seeing what lies underneath. So I like to use it in both senses. And I did, because I was a bit squeamish, I did decide that I wanted to tackle that full on, because I don't like having things that in any way hold me in any kind of pall, something that keeps you in fear, has power over you. So I wanted to try and conquer this. And so I went to Guy's Hospital and worked in the dissecting room doing drawings and studies and photographs. And I used a lot of that material in subsequent work.
After I had had a surgery on my knee as a young girl, and they put a cast on, then they had to take it off, and they had to put another one on, and they said, don't look down, don't look down. And of course I did. And it was a swollen, bloody mess. Now, someone that has never had fear, that's when I became obsessed with the inside or the gruesomeness. There used to be this fantastic channel, which was all operations, and I was just obsessed with it. I just was.
Right. I find it a bit easier to look at the dead corpses and all their layers, as they're more objectified than when you have someone who's living in my own. You know, I'm not too keen on seeing my own blood being let out.
Well, I have to say, I'd rather see a corpse than a living Kardashian, but that's just my opinion.
Oh my God.
Tim, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No. It was in relation to what you're saying earlier. You know, clearly I saw the documentary. You're very strong-willed, and one thing that stood out to me earlier on in your life is just your constant way of challenging authority and authoritative figures. And after a whole life of artwork, you're kind of an authority, at least with your own perspective. And do you have a different relationship with authority now, do you think? Are you still?
I try to make peace with things, but basically, I don't think, being a rebel is a choice. It's just you don't fit in. And when you don't fit in and you don't conform, you just have to go by the beat of your own drum, and I've always been like that, for better or for worse. And I think I continue to be so, even though, as I say, I try to keep the soft edges with the authority, not get into too much direct confrontation, sneak under the radar if I can, but I know I'm subversive all the time because I am not happy with the systems that we have in place.
Right.
If they were fulfilling and if they allowed you to reach your full potential and live magical, incredibly dynamic lives, then I would say, fine, perhaps I could conform. But because I still don't believe that, you have to challenge it. And I know you're the same thing, Lydia. I think it's people who have the kind of aspiration and the longing for something that, isn't there. We're the ones who come up and clash against things and can sometimes be seen as being nihilistic, but actually we're not. We're so incredibly optimistic that we say something more than what we're offered, and we want to fight for that.
Thank you very much for noticing in that, because I am one of the most optimistic people I know. As I like to say, the end is near. I'm kind of happy about it. Ha ha, that was Kafka. That's not really me. Kafka was there is hope, but not for us. Tim has seen many times, I don't even need to challenge authority. It kind of bows to me.
Well, that's a different thing, yes.
Since I've never felt any guilt, and I like to seduce police until they cry, and he's seen this happen. That's how I like to fuck with the police. I want to go back to something else that I really relate to, especially in the early work, just as you're in college and doing the early collages or doing the film, which I thought was fantastic, the Ilford Hall. I love the way that you use architecture. I was obsessed with this Spanish Civil War town of ruins, which I photographed quite often, and the way that you use a deserted mansion, a decrepit, beautiful house that's been ruined, to explore your interior and your psychodynamics, and that every room might open into another possibility which lies inside you. Can you just talk about that a little? I just find it so haunting and gorgeous, the way that you have depicted that.
Well, the place itself, when I went in, I was absolutely entranced by it, because places have always had, for me, so much energy. They're like people, and they collect the energies that have come through them. And so if you're sensitive to those things, you can feel all that in there. So this place had so many spirits that were just, filling the energy in the air. And also I love the idea that, this huge stately mansion, this is the seat of power. This is what we look up to. And yet it was desolate and derelict and in ruins. And so I thought this was a fantastic symbol, and that one could come in and take over this domain and reimagine it, reprogram reprogram it with one's own psyche. And so I thought, well, let me take this as, you know, my father's house and many mansions. Well, yeah, but my father isn't here now. Let me have this mansion and let me open each door to explore the new possibilities of what's in the psyche, because we are infinite. And each door that we open leads to something more. And it's only from being scared of opening those doors and what skeletons in the cupboards can fall out that we don't really look. So I wanted to look, and I wanted to let those skeletons fall where they may, and in seeing them, then take away their power again, as I was saying earlier. If you're frightened of something, it's going to hold you, but once you're able to go through it and exorcise it, as is what I was trying to do here, bring these things to light so that they didn't have power over me. And using this house, it was a symbol of everything in a way that I had come into in my life, and the values and these systems. And so I was looking at it in a way saying, well, what are these things can I own and say are part of me? And what am I going to look at and say, no, this is a projection of collectively held values or the projection of my lover on me. And I'm going to try and explore and find out what's mine and what doesn't belong to me that I don't need to own.
As you're speaking about exercising, you know, I don't even think they're demons. I think that whatever obsessions or people think are taboos that we have, it's not, you have to own them. You have to understand them. You have to dive fully into them. And the thing is, it doesn't matter what your obsession or even your addiction is, as long as it doesn't own you and you understand and drive it. And that brings us up to, you know, the book, incredible book you made that was 7 years in the making, called Exorcism, which was dealing with, you know, dark fantasies, sexuality, reclaiming yourself basically, and taking, as you just said, the key back from perhaps the projection of your lover's fantasy and owning your own fantasy. Because women's fantasies, let's face it, they run the gamut. I mean, we are sexual schizophrenics on the best of nights.
But that's multidimensional. That's not schizophrenic. Let's give it the right name. You know, we've got all of that, and it's a rich and fertile ground out of which everything springs. And as we deny all those things which are in our subconscious and our unconscious, so we become semi-beings living in this mundane reality and accepting things as they are in these boxes, whereas we can just dive into all those realms. And once you have access to that world of imagination and world of dreams, then you can never be bored or never be alone or never be stifled by the mundane plane of things, because you have access to this. And at the beginning of an exorcism, I show what to me is a picture of kind of horror. There's a door opens and there's a brick wall behind it. And it's that idea that the imagination is blocked off. And at that point, I show the image of the man, the animus, my partner, holding the key. And so I'm like, why has he got the key and I don't have the key? I've got to go on a detective journey here to find out and get that key back. So at the end of the book, I emerge holding the key, and with the man as a small symbol inside me, you know, claiming myself again to come out and go on the next phase of my journey, but only through going through all those worlds of dark and light was I able to kind of come out again. And I think that it's important that we give ourselves permission to do that. And people are frightened of the dark night of the soul, but we all have them. And I just wanted to put up some signposts on the way to say, you can go there and come back. Ariadne has got a thread, and it does lead through the labyrinth and get you out again. So that was really the thesis.
Well, we've never had any problem going into that dark night of the soul, because we want to not only embrace it as a friend, to be free of it. Now, exactly, that's what we're doing. Well, let me just describe the images in The Exorcism and a lot of your early work anyway. Gorgeous black and white montage, very surrealistic, very inspired by Max Ernst, using images of mostly yourself, occasion, and your partner at the time, and incorporating just the most haunting, eerie, sexy, dark visions of the female interior. Very successful job on that book, Exorcism.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just glorious. Oh, Tim, you were asking her about California.
Well, yes. Are you in California as we speak?
Yes, I'm in downtown LA.
Okay, so you're not getting, it's not the epicenter of the fires, although they are in the periphery right now.
No, luckily not. I used to live in Northern California in the Redwoods, and a lot of the
Oh boy.
fires that came recently were very near to the property that I was in for 23 years. So I feel grateful not to be there now, but in, absolute shock and awe about the power of these fires that I think are just getting worse and worse each year at the moment. And it seems amazing that there isn't anything in our modern technology to help us really combat something that comes on this kind of scale. So it is looking very apocalyptic out there. And I ironically feel safer in the middle of a city than I would in nature at the moment.
Well, it was startling to me that at one point a couple of weeks ago, within 72 hours, there were 12,000 lightning strikes.
Right, right.
And that's unheard of.
I know.
I mean, the same way that there were, 2 or 3 hurricanes, running up the Gulf of Mexico at one time, the same as it's going to be the most vivid hurricane season on record. I mean, I've been talking about apocalyptic nature's revenge for decades, and we are seeing it happen.
I
And it's
know.
horrifying.
I've
It's
been so
horrifying.
disturbed by how little regard that humans have given to the whole hoop of life and cycle of life, and that you only take when you give back, and all that knowledge the indigenous people have held and we've swept under the carpet and just, raped and pillaged this planet. And you don't do that without repercussion, and so we're looking at something happening now, and I hope there can be enough waking up in humanity to do something, because if not, I mean, we're not going to last.
In the last some time, you did go to an island to
Yeah.
do some work there. Can you talk a little bit about that and when you were doing that and what that was all
In
about?
the Caribbean, right?
In the Caribbean, yes. I lived
Yep.
for 15 years in the Caribbean, and
How wonderful.
Which island?
13 years of that on Anguilla, which is a small 16 miles by 3 miles wide, beautiful, beautiful paradisical island. And when I was there, what called me in terms of my work were the Arawak Indians, who were the indigenous people of the region. So I spent most of my sojourn there actually recreating them and their life and reintroducing them to the local people who didn't really know much about that history. And yet it was so rich and vibrant, and every time it rained you could go out and find remnants of the culture there in the archaeology. So that became the thing that I immersed myself in while I was there, the whole indigenous culture and their way of life, and how much their spirit was still there, connected with the land.
And were you creating collages, photographs, artwork at that period, or was it more of also an investigation into this disappearing culture?
Well, when I went there, it was a decision I had to make. Shall I keep doing the kind of work I've been doing and send it back to New York or London to show? Because I knew it wasn't something that I could really show the people there. It was too challenging, erotic, wild, and
Not necessary there, really.
really not something that could connect. So I thought, well, do I keep doing that, or shall I try and make a bridge through my art with the culture here? And I decided on the second thing. And so I went back to painting and pastels and things that I hadn't done for so long, because I'd been working in multimedia and collage. But I used those gifts and then tried to create a language that was accessible and communicable with those people who were living in the island, and to try and help stimulate and wake up the local culture to art. Because when I went there, they didn't even teach art in the school. So there wasn't any consciousness that art had a place, or that these people were here before them. So that became kind of a mission, and just the spirit of the Arawak people, who was so connected with the land, it spoke to me so strongly that I couldn't help but take that up and work with that energy. And I produced over 100 paintings and pastels in that time and exhibited them there. A lot of those remain with the people on the island who started dreaming about them and had to get those pictures. And then I made a film at the end called Visions of the Arawaks, which kind of brought the whole series together and completed that cycle.
Then you became interested at one point in tantric expressions and also making a deck of cards. I mean, you've always been, and of course I say this with the highest regard because so am I, extremely witchy. And I want to get back to actually, first of all, the women's theater group, Holocaust, which was, I guess, 1971. And it was kind of a rebellion against the other form of, I would say, staid feminism that was out there, that was going down. I mean, look, there was a sexual revolution, there was all kinds of feminism, but you, with your female cohorts, decided you had to do something a little bit different, and you started this women's theater group called Holocaust.
Right.
From which then a play and a film came from, and I want to talk about that film. Remind me of the name of it, please, from the underneath. What was the name of that?
Other Side of the Underneath. And the theater production was called A New Communion for Freaks, Prophets, and Witches.
And Witches.
So there we have it. And yes, it's true. You know, the feminism at that time, it seemed to be very politically orientated and about trying to get the same rights for women as men had and that kind of thing, which is an important part of feminism. But it didn't seem to be touching on the things that I was particularly fascinated by, which was about women being able to actually own and enjoy their sexuality and sensuality, and that we're a whole package. And I didn't want to be just like a man. I wanted to be respected and honored, and all other women too, for who we are. And all of us and all of our intuition and all of our knowing and everything that hasn't had pride of place for so long. So that's why when I had the opportunity to join with this women's theatre group run by Jane Arden, I jumped at it because it was active and we were making an artistic statement and we were all going to dig into our psyches and find out all this stuff, dredge it up, and then be able to make an art form of it in form of this theatre production. And that seemed to me, at that time, I was looking at the art world and wanting to really find my place in the art world. But at the same time, I wanted to give myself to something that was going to be kind of bigger than just the whole egoical side of art, of being this famous artist on your own. I wanted to be part of a group and have that a community and interaction and contribute my talents to that. So that's why I eagerly became part of this group.
Was there a lot of headbutting? Based on the documentary, that's the impression I got, that you guys had to just kind of filter out whatever you had and come to the conclusions you had, and you're willing to get down in the mud in order to come to certain points.
Yeah, it did get pretty muddy. It was a bit muddy, but the play was a real joy because all of that work that we did together, it was very revelatory, and we all felt it was a full participation in the way that we'd signed up, that Jane was holding the container, but we were all co-creating this together, and that's what we were looking for, and that was why it was so magical. And then the mood of the actual theatre presentation was very much like a vignettes in a cabaret kind of style. So although some of the stuff was very tough and very dark and heavy and intense, it also had a lightness in the way that we were bringing it forth that made it able to be accessible for people and for people to enjoy it at the same time that they were having their psyche shaken up. But when it went into the film, it was a bit different.
I want to talk about the film because it seems, do fill me in, was there LSD therapy sessions? Because I do believe in the power of healing through LSD, if you can ever get your hands on the real stuff.
Right. Yes, there were. And I actually took LSD for the first time on film for that. I didn't do it as part of the therapy sessions where it was the group. I did it on my own with Jane, and it was a very powerful experience. However, it wasn't really included in the film at all because the experience I had, although Jane asked me to go into this, my first trip, mind you, on the theme of oppression, that was not the experience I had. So the experience I had was, I just remember sitting there going, oh my God, I'm all right. I'm actually very all right. And I felt so connected in such an incredible way. And it was so healing for me and so profoundly transformative and so real that when I left from there, I was walking the streets of London, it seemed for days, thinking, how do I integrate this with the rest of my life? This has been the most powerful moment of lifting veils that I've ever had, and I felt more real than I ever have. How can I make this now part of my everyday existence?
Well, and the thing is, once good LSD lifts those veils, it's like you are already there. But the film seemed to be controversial within the players in it. I mean, for instance, the cello player's husband, in protest against what he considered the black magic of the film, self-immolated.
Yes, no, it got very heavy. And the thing is, it did change from what we did with the play into what we did with the film. And I wanted to continue and do the film, even though Peter Whitehead, my partner at the time, didn't want me to do it. But I thought I'd made a commitment and I wanted to see it through. And because so much had come to light during the play, I wanted to continue and do the film. But then the film's intention really shifted. We went to Wales, where Jane was born and raised, and it became really Jane's story of her own, psychosis and everything, and using all of us to act that out, the different facets of it. And because of that, it didn't have that same mutually awakening feeling. It became, in a sense, more exploitative again, which was the problem. And so when, in the end, Martin did kill himself like that, and there's a whole stories that lead up to that, which we don't have time to go into now, but that, to me, I remember I thought that I'd be perhaps splitting up from Peter afterwards if he wouldn't understand the new kind of freedom that I'd owned through my first trip and all of this expansion. I thought it'd be easy. Either he's going to accept that and we'll go on from height to height together, or he won't and I'll leave. But when Martin killed himself, I just remember going and grabbing and holding him and saying, don't let this happen to you, don't let this happen to you. And that then meant we had a few months of trying to hold on to the relationship, which didn't work out, but it was a very painful time.
I wanted to ask you about this because one question that I just was in the back of my head when I was looking at the documentary and doing more research on you. Have you ever had your heart broken? Because it seems like every relationship that you deal with, whether it's through work or a romantic one, you kind of go at it really headstrong, and you take on the projections or the reflections, and you filter it the way you want to, and you come to the conclusions that you want to on your terms. And not everyone does that. And I'm just wondering, you seem so at peace with all these things. Has anyone ever broken your heart?
Oh, my heart has broken so many times, but you know how it is. If you don't break it open, you can't let the light in, as they say, which is quite a cliche. But at the same time, I think you have to be able to have that kind of open-heartedness and not to armor and close your heart. And in fact, the creation of an exorcism was all made because my heart was so broken. My heart was broken because I'd lost the most important relationship with the man that I had. And it was also broken because the women's theater group had all broken up too. So it was like I'd lost the male and female side of myself all at once. And I was devastated. And I remember it was the only time in my life I went to a psychiatrist, but I only went for like 2 or 3 times. And he said to me, you don't need to come to me. You're doing your own psychoanalysis. And that's what an exorcism was. It was my own psychoanalysis. And that's why it took 7 years to fully process it all. But that was what I took on to mend my broken heart and see how it got broken and understand the parts of that heart. And I have always tried to keep my heart wide open. But when you do that, then you're vulnerable. But if you don't do that, you don't have anything really to play with, because your heart is your great wisdom holder. And if you don't allow things into your heart, you can't really know. You can only have, information, but you can't have the real wisdom of the heart, which I believe needs to be the guiding force of everything we do.
I want to go back to something that I found quite interesting about somebody's partner involved in the film who sets himself on fire when in the past we would have been the ones being burnt.
Well, interesting.
As witches. Yeah.
Interestingly enough, and this is what I wasn't going to get into, but I'll very quickly say it, at a certain point in the film, they asked me to go up on my stilts on this burning colliery, and up high on this structure. And it was the only time I actually said no to anything. And why I said no is because I got this very strong sense that we'd reached a point in everything in a very witchy way where there was a sacrifice required. And I knew that if I went up there, I was going to be that sacrifice, and I didn't want to be. And then at this gypsy party that was held, it's on film, two young men started fighting, and I again knew this is going to be a sacrifice, and it's not their sacrifice to give. And I went in and I broke up that fight, even though I don't particularly like to go in the midst of men fighting. I went and I stopped the fighting because I didn't want that sacrifice to happen. So I thought that I'd prevented these sacrifices of myself, of the young men at the gypsy party, but then Martin. So the sacrifice did happen.
Let's talk about what's going on now, because you are in this renaissance. I mean, I was very interested in your work with Christian Dior. Did they contact you to have these beautiful photographs of your architectural studies up? I just thought that was so fantastic.
Yes, Maria Grazia Chiuri contacted me because she was familiar with my work, particularly the exorcism series, and they were moving their creative studio from the historic building where it had been on all the salons for all these years, and it was going to change to retail outlet. And so she wanted to do something to transform the place so that it would be a marker for this big transition. And so I meditated on it and thought what we should do was an alchemy and invite the elements in for this alchemy in a very witchy way, of course, but transform the interior of this iconic space with air, fire, water, earth, and ether, and make this then be the turning the inside out or bringing the outside in, so that all of nature took over this space. And it's a little bit like, you know, when you have in a shamanic tradition, a death and a rebirth, that you give the body back to the elements and then it can be reborn out of those ashes, so to speak. So that was the idea, that it would be this transformational process. And then I embodied the pure gold that would come out at the end of this alchemy with this dollhouse, which was the facade of the actual building, made into a wearable doll's house and then covered in pure gold leaf, which was the last look of the show, so that would be the feminine was then carrying the energy of this place out from its actual confines into the world in a symbolic way.
Well, I hope they put some gold in your pocket as well, because let's face it. And what's incredible is, you know, there are some artists, it takes, writers specifically, could take 300 years for recognition. Visual artists, it could take decades. Musicians, it could take decades. And when you're creating art, as we do, all of us combined here, and almost everybody that we have on this podcast, it is something that is out of time, in time, and beyond time. Because if you're dealing specifically, as you and I do, with archetypes, with obsession, with trauma, and with rebirth, with growth, with power, with sexuality. These are things, especially from a feminine perspective, which have not been investigated enough. And
Right.
That's why we're still talking.
Right, exactly.
And creating. Yeah.
And you're so right. It's always, for me, I've been wanting to not follow fashion, but actually create something that hits a timeless note, you know, that's going to be always relevant, because it's to do with who we are inside, not with what we are outside. And so that's so important. And it's still a struggle. I mean, I have the recognition in some ways. It's great that my voice can be heard now, but it's still a long way off from really getting that kind of integration that we're seeking, and to have the kind of platform that I really would love to have, to be able to get what is inside me out that I think has a reflection in so many other women who are longing to have that example set so that they can loosen their chains and get out there and be themselves more fully and appropriately. And not only women, but men too, the female side of men that's been so suppressed. All of this has been, part of a cultural matrix that's held us kind of static and stagnant in so many ways. And having that opportunity with Dior was great because I could spread my wings, have a whole team of people and a whole funding to do something on a grander scale. But it's really whetted my appetite now, and I'd love to do more on that kind of level, and to be able to bring things into a wider scope like that. It's so exciting, and it's also part of what I felt for many years now was, it's such a shame, in fact, a sin, that especially women of a certain age, once we become older, we're considered as not relevant anymore. But this is actually when we're coming into our most relevant time, when we've got most to offer back, and yet there are not many avenues for that because we're not the hot, young, magnetic chick, and then who cares? But, I knew that this was going to be something that I want to tackle, and now I'm at that age to tackle it. I'm doing it, and I've returned to using my own naked body as my muse in my own work so that I can show this relevance and that this muse is not dead. She's alive and well, and actually more alive and active, and the beauty is much bigger than just how you put your lipstick on.
Well, as I always considered myself, even at the age of 30, that I would live to be the oldest living woman of rage. And but this is what's important to me about the podcast, and it's important to me too when I curate spoken word, which I do with a lot of women, is that I have to show multi-generational women who have different experiences. And back to fashion for a minute, because really in the 60s, when you were perfectly the it girl, but you rejected normal fashion when they approached you. But now, yes, it should come and support you. Why not? And again, it's only taken 40 years for them to catch up. We're still alive.
Right, exactly. And I've always loved
we're not going away. Penny, we're not going
are
away.
not. And that's why I am trying to, get my voice out there loudly. And people like us are so needed because you've got to have some balls to get out there and actually really, not be afraid or diminished, because we're not diminished at all. We're more powerful and more enriched as we get older.
The reason you don't see me wearing pants is my balls are too big to fit in them, honey. I've got no fear. I do not diminish with age. Right. This is not going away. We find, and we have to, and we do. It's just we sophisticate, we change, we find different methods. We have to find different vehicles to express still what we've always been expressing, which is, rebirth after the trauma of birth, which we've all suffered from. I'm lucky that I work with so many liberated men of a certain generation that, Tim Dahl, Weasel Walter, Simon Slater, almost all the musicians I've worked with have been incredibly liberated people. And of course, I have my own coven of witches that we do a variety of things. And the coven is important. It's all of this is important. Community is what's important. And that's why it's important for me to do something like this, to expose people to other people who really want to know what creative instigators who continue to be stubbornly outside of everything, yet so much themselves. It's so important. And that's why we're so happy to have you on this.
And I could say that it's a tribute to you of how much you know who you are yourself, that you're able to do that and hold this container to bring forth other people. Because I've found, so many artists in particular, they're worried about competition. They don't want to bring other people up in fear it'll diminish them. But if you know who you are, then it's a joy to see the reflection in others. And we all have our own unique piece to bring. And so that's been one of my things too, to help and support other women, get rid of this bullshit competition, and to actually help all of us to rise and glow.
Yeah. I've never felt competition in anything I've done because, first of all, I'm my biggest fan. I stand outside of everything, but I have this ability to bring people in. Tim knows this very well, working with me for years, and especially bringing women in. I don't understand jealousy. I have a strong ego, but it's not to the deficit of other people.
Right.
I want other people to feel as strong and should I say healthy? Because of course we know I'm insane, but I'm the most I'm the most sane, insane person I know.
Absolutely.
But Tim, you could jump in about something on that because that's how we are. Tim too. He's one of the healthiest maniacs I've ever met.
What got me the gig with Lydia was, 'cause I'm in her band, was actually not the music audition. It was that I have an aunt who I love so much, and well, she was a prostitute and she killed someone, and she was someone I really cared about so much.
Could you blame her?
But also,
her?
I'm blessed that my mother is independent, and I respected her quite a bit. And she had her own career, and so I was lucky enough to have great female role models in my life. It's easy for me to work with women, but let's go back to jealousy. And I mean, obviously, Peter and that whole thing. I mean, jealousy must have been a big part of that in terms of his angle. Did you ever experience jealousy that much, or is that something you were always just kind of felt alien to you?
Oh, no, I did. And I think it started when my parents were told by a hospital. When I was young, I was in hospital with a mystery disease, and they said, oh, she's very precocious and she's kind of frail. So we suggest that you have another child, especially for her father to not be focusing on her so much and to spread his attention. So when my brother was born, I absolutely couldn't stand him because he was being deliberately brought in to ruin my whole scene. And so I was angry with him and jealous, and I didn't like that feeling.
Right.
And because I didn't like that feeling, then I tried to work on that. And then when that occurred in terms of other relationships, I mean, there's a lot of that in An Exorcism, where I have not only Peter, my partner, but my girlfriend, Sue. And this whole dynamic of, whether the woman is like the reflection of yourself in your alter ego and part of you in that way, or whether she's the other woman, and therefore all this competitive side being brought up. So all of that I try to really look at and explore in depth, because I found when there are things that I don't like about myself, then I want to try and get to the bottom of what this is and to work through
I couldn't
it.
agree anymore, because that was always one thing I could never understand, because the few times I felt these kind of things, it feels so bad, and yet when someone comes to you with jealousy, they're trying to force this empathy onto you because they want you to feel what they're feeling, because they're in so much pain, and they want to just project that onto you. And it's, if you love someone, why would you want them to feel how bad you're fucking feeling?
Well, and I'm gonna jump in because I felt jealousy once. Delete. It was the worst, most toxic, burning feeling I've ever felt. And literally one time was enough. And also, I feel I want everybody to do exactly what they want to do. They're not here to do what I want them to do, because I'm going to do what I want to do.
Right.
So, I mean, that jealousy was only because a partner of mine had sex with my dire, and I've only had one or two dire enemies in my life, in the bathroom of a pool hall we used to always go to. And I thought that was just disrespectful. But after feeling it once, I just couldn't even, I was so horrified that people actually live in states of jealousy. I just don't have it. I mean, I don't have a lot of those toxic emotions. I'm just lucky that way. But jealousy is just, I don't get it. It's why. If somebody wants to do something, they should fucking do it.
Exactly.
Again, it's this traditionalism that still exists in people today. Like, and I love your piece that was against marriage, because the bride as the cake and the interior of the bride, because these are just ridiculous traditions. But again, these emotions are something that people can't seem to shake. Even if they could maybe intellectually rationalize it, these are ugly, greedy emotions that live inside organs that you really have got to work hard to get rid of, because they're death.
Yeah.
They're fire. They burn. They're horrible.
I know. And I mean, the thing is, if you feel those things, if there's someone who gets something and you think, oh, lucky them, I wish I could have that. Well, then try and get it. Simple enough. Everybody has their own piece. Nobody stands in somebody else's place. So this is the thing. When someone's jealous, it's like they're not owning their own reality and trying to have somebody else's.
Well, and I guess if everybody could recognize how they do stand on their own pillar, and back to the fact that I've never felt any sense of competition or envy or any of that, because look, it's not that I so much stand alone, but I know where I stand, and I want other people to know that about themselves too, because how did we get so beaten down? Well, again, it's the trauma of birth, that there are so many toxic emotions put into children, whether it's humiliation, shame, jealousy. Just saying.
What do you're in beautiful sunny California. Besides this whole world that I know you to have and be, what else do you do? I mean, do you cook? Do you go for nature walks? Like, what do you do to kind of just maybe in your own private time, just to kind of get your mind off of things?
Well, I love nature. I also love the city. I love things about the place that I'm in. And that's another thing that I found, one of the tricks, if you like, of actually feeling satisfied with your life is, if you're in nature, appreciate everything that is of nature. If you're in the town, appreciate that. Don't be in the town wishing you were in nature, etc., etc. And this is what happens, like with relationships. Someone's in a relationship and they're wishing they could be out of it, or they're not in it and they're wishing they could have it. I mean, we can appreciate the things that we have while we have them. And I've lived, when I was in the Caribbean, I thought, how will I ever leave here? It was paradise. It was so beautiful. And yet my life shifted, and it was around a time when I started thinking, you know, maybe I should be back somewhere where I can be a little more relevant to the mainstream of consciousness that's happening. And then boom, you know, my relationship dissolved. I was thrown back into a different situation. And then I just had 23 years living in the middle of the redwoods in California, which was the heart of nature, and appreciating everything of that. And foxes coming to my door and feeding them. You know, all of that was so wonderful and so rich. But now I'm not there. I'm now in the middle of downtown, but I'm loving this. I'm loving having the convenience and the connectedness. Of course, things are a little weirder now in the middle of the pandemic, but that aside, you know, I really appreciate the things that I'm having here and the connection with other people that you can get, and the, you know, so everything has good things about it. If you focus,
I mean, I agree that, and that
those.
whole grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. It's people's obsession with this false sense of progress and not being in the like they want to be working I mean, I guess you have to work towards goals and stuff, but yeah, finding just happiness in the present, I guess that's it's kind of a rare thing
Well, let me quote myself. Pleasure is the ultimate rebellion.
Absolutely.
Pleasure is the ultimate rebellion. And that has been my mantra for a long time. And we have to create our own pleasure. I mean, I'm loving quarantine, but then again, I can satisfy myself. Thanks again to that good doctor who invented the electric vibrator during the reign of female hysteria. This has been the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and Penny Slinger. Amazing, creative, surrealistic, female psyche, breaking open the walls, taboos, obsessions, digging deeper continually into understanding what really drives us, and hoping to get to a place which I think you have arrived at, and I feel so have I, where pleasure is what we deserve, whether it's through art, music, life, and you have to enjoy. Because if you're not enjoying things, if you're not enjoying as much of your life as possible, you're actually ripping yourself off. And look, trust me, there's a lot to be pissed off about, but I'm paid to be pissed off, and I'm not pissed off for the most part in my regular life.
Right. Well, talking of pleasure, yeah, art, you know, when I'm making art, I'm happy. You know, that gives me the most pleasure, because I feel most that I'm in alignment with what I'm on the planet to really do, that uniquely is my contribution. And so that is so satisfying and so pleasurable. And I don't really need much else for that. I can be in quarantine, I can be on a desert island, I can be anywhere. If I'm able to be creative and expressing that creativity, then I'm happy as a clam.
And thank you for still being here and sharing all of this with us. The documentary / beautiful art film, Out of the Shadows by Richard Kovitch, understanding your early career as an incredible female surrealist in so many different forms of art, is available now. And I really urge people to dig deep and investigate all you've given us. Thank you, Penny.
Thank you so much, Lydia. I could talk to you forever.
Thank you, Penny.
You.
Nice meeting you.
Enjoyed it so much. Lovely to meet you too.